participants join us so that we can all join together. And again, in addition to the leadership members that Mr. Embrico recognized, we also see that we have several staff members from some of our schools in the area present. So thank you for your time this evening and for joining us. As Louis said, thank you again so much, all of you, for joining us this evening. I am grateful for this opportunity to share with you information from the second draft of the enrollment plan that was presented to the Board of Education on October 17th. Specific to tonight's session, we will be discussing recommendations around the possibility of converting Pleasant Grove Elementary to a multi-track year-round calendar. The presentation will be set up where we'll start with an overview of the initial recommendations and what got us to the point of being able to ask this question, and then we'll use the majority of our time to take your questions towards the end of the session. If you have questions that are related to other portions of the enrollment plan, we'll save those toward the end of the session. If we have time, our focus for tonight will be specifically to talk about the Pleasant Grove Elementary year-round calendar discussion item. To provide some context, on October 17th, as I mentioned earlier, staff members presented the second draft of the 2024-25 student enrollment plan or proposal to the Board of Education. This draft included updates from the public engagement activities that were related to the release of the first draft of the recommendations that were included in that first release. During the work session and based on feedback collected from families related to the release of the first draft of the proposal, the board directed staff to further explore the impacts of converting Pleasant Grove Elementary from a traditional calendar to a multi-track year-round calendar. Again, the purpose of today's session is to share a brief update on the results of the public engagement activities specific to the recommendations related to Pleasant Grove, and to address any questions that you may have related to the potential of Pleasant Grove Elementary becoming a multi-track year-round school. Your feedback will be used as the final draft of the proposal is prepared, and the final draft is scheduled to go to the board on November 21st. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. Before we begin, let me go over a few logistics. Our session will last for no more than an hour and a half. And again, we'll begin with a brief presentation and then conclude by spending as much of our time as possible answering questions that you pose during today's session. So how can you pose those questions? Because this is a unique conversation separate from the general discussion about the second draft release, this is a very specific thought exchange just for this conversation. Most of you should have received a link to this when information was sent out to families shortly after the board work session on the 17th. I believe those emails went out on the 18th. Either way, if you can join us on this thought exchange, this will be the official public comment capture tool for this particular conversation about the potential for converting Pleasant Grove to year-round. If you will use the hashtag session6 in your comments tonight, that will allow our host to be able to find those comments and questions that are being posted live today, so we can make sure we address those questions during today's session. In addition, if you'd like, you also may use the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet itself. Just be reminded that if you use the Q&A feature, it may not be included in the full set of comments and the board members may not be able to see all of your comments. However, if it's easier for you to post your question using the Q&A feature, we absolutely want you to do that. So if you're on a computer, if you'll look towards the bottom right of your screen, you'll see this shape that's highlighted and circled. It has a triangle, a circle, and a square. If you'll click on that, it'll open up another area and you're going to look for a question mark. If you're on a mobile device, you'll actually start by looking for the three dots and then go to that shape feature, the triangle, square, circle, and then what you're really looking for is this question mark in the QA feature. So if you post your comment or question using the QA feature, our moderators will grab those comments and they'll save them somewhere so that our host can ask those questions toward the end of today's session. If you see that your comment has been removed, then that's your confirmation that it has been captured by our moderators and that we will address that question toward the end of today's session. So again, you have two ways of posting questions. One would be to use the thought exchange. So again, if you've not already posted your comment or thought or suggestion in the thought exchange, I highly encourage you to put it there because that is the official public comment capture tool. However, if you want to ask a question that maybe you've already posted to the thought exchange, or you want to ask a question that's a little bit more nuanced and specific to your family's situation, by all means, use the Q&A feature. I will share that again later in the presentation in case you need to access that and didn't have a question right away. I will always remind all of our families to please visit our enrollment proposal website. This is where we continuously update information related to the proposal process. So information from the first draft is here, the second draft. We did release an update to the frequently asked questions as we shared the second draft last week. And so by about Monday, I would expect there to be some updates based on the information sessions that are being held yesterday and today. So continuously review that website, particularly the frequently asked questions section, because that is where we post all of our responses to the types of questions we get, not only through the thought exchange, but also through these information sessions. And I presume that most of you have visited us at one of our other presentations, so I'm not going to show the video. If you're familiar with the video, you got a little reprieve. But we just want to remind everyone that Board Policy 4150 does guide our work. And while we look at things like student assignment, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency, we just want to remind everyone they have very specific definitions from a policy perspective. And we have to balance all four of them, and no one is necessarily in a higher priority than the others. And it is a challenge, and we recognize that reassignment in general is just generally what people prefer not to have happen. We understand that. And we also have an obligation to maintain the district's resources and to provide the highest quality educational opportunities for students that we can, which takes into account the total number of students on any one campus. So we'll engage in that in a little bit more. For today's session, I think I've jumped forward a little bit. Before we get to your questions, we're going to share a few of the updates that were provided to the board during the work session, but we're going to emphasize how they're impacting today's conversation. And then we'll also review the timeline just so that you know what your next steps are if you want to engage maybe in a public hearing or just continue watching the process as it unfolds. So the first updates that we want to quickly go through are the progress of the public engagement activities. Again, we want to emphasize the feedback that specifically relates to the conversation today about Pleasant Grove potentially becoming a multi-track year-round school. We also want to share a little bit about updates just because they're related to this region, and then a few of the recommended stability rules. So we're going to start with what we learned from our public engagement activities. As a reminder, we hosted an online thought exchange to capture feedback regarding all aspects of the first proposal, and we hosted 4 regionally focused virtual public information sessions to help explain the plan and answer questions live, similar to this format, during each of those sessions. Recordings of those presentations are posted to our website, just as tonight's session will be recorded and posted for reviewing later. In addition, we have used the information that we received from those information sessions, as well as the thought exchange, as I mentioned, to update the frequently asked questions portion of our website. So just as a reminder, at any time during the presentation, if you have a question, thought, comment, we again highly encourage you to use the thought exchange. If you're using the thought exchange, please use the hashtag session6 so that we'll know that it's being posted live today in today's session and get to that question. However, if you want to use the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet, you can as well. And I know a few of you joined since I explained this. So if you use the Q&A feature in Google Meet, you're just looking for that shape either in the bottom of your screen if you're on your computer. If you're on a mobile device, you're looking for the 3 dots and then the shape, but ultimately what you're looking for is that question mark that's labeled QA. This will allow you to post questions anonymously, and as you post those questions, our moderators are capturing those questions and comments and storing them. So if you see that your question or comment or thought has been removed from the Q&A feature, that's your confirmation that we have received that comment and it has been captured by our moderators. Okay. So the thought exchange, some of you have already seen this slide if you watched the work session on October 17th or perhaps came to yesterday's session, but we just want to highlight that a large majority of participants in the thought exchange identified as being from the Northwestern area. So that was a key for us, that there was a high level of participation from this region. In addition, as you look at the 3 highest rated comments, one of those was about the concept of moving from traditional to year-round or year-round to traditional and being able to have some sort of stability with calendar. So that was a common highly rated comment universally throughout the entire thought exchange for all families, but certainly particular to today's conversation. In addition, you'll notice that although school calendar appears to have a low number of comments, remember that the way that this works is that the thought exchange helps us to put comments into themes based on the overall sentiment. And so in this case, it's not so much if you use the word calendar, it's that the phrasing of the comment was about concerns about school calendar. So if you liked your calendar or were appreciative of the calendar, it may not have made it into this bucket or into this theme. But what you'll notice more importantly is that that same theme became one of our highest rated themes overall. So definitely something that drew the attention of the board and drew the attention of staff that we really need to dig into these questions and comments about school calendar, because They are highly rated across the board by all participants. And then again, just a reminder of what types of questions and comments might be in that school calendar tab. And so it would be something related to perhaps a calendar application school, concerns about changing calendar. Again, that's really significant for today's conversation. And of course, calendar alignment. Again, another element that's of specific concern to today's conversation. And again, highly rated. This was actually a high total volume and total quantity. So the Northwestern area, by use of school name or community name, had the highest total number of thoughts. So again, a highly participatory group that really is actively engaging in the discussion and the dialogue. So what I'd like to remind everyone, particularly those of you who weren't able to join us last night, is that staff clearly heard with all of the feedback from draft one that being reassigned is not the preferred option for families. If you look at this top, it's not top rated, but just the first thought that's listed in one of our key takeaways is just that strong desire for stability and continuity. We hear that, we understand that, and we're trying to do everything we can to minimize the impact of reassignments to the smallest group possible, yet to be able to maintain our operational efficiency and give families schools that aren't severely overcrowded. And in some cases, it means going to a school that's not your most proximate school, but it is the closest school to your community that has available capacity for a sustainable period of time. However, in this particular area, for today's particular conversation, a lot of the concerns that we heard were related to the shift of students coming from Alston Ridge Elementary and Parkside Elementary into Pleasant Grove, moving from a current multi-track year-round calendar to a traditional calendar. That's the calendar for Pleasant Grove. In addition, because those same neighborhoods wouldn't have a middle school change, as you may be aware, there is a new middle school coming online in this region in a couple of years, so we wouldn't make a recommendation to change middle schools at this time. That does create a calendar misalignment. So this idea about concerns about lack of calendar choice options and having calendar misalignment is definitely top of mind for a lot of families throughout the district, but particularly in this region. Again, as we focus on the specific information that came from the public information sessions related to the first draft, again, high levels of participation in the session that focused on the Northwestern region, and two key takeaways that we really want to highlight that are driving today's conversation. First, one of the key takeaways from this session was that there were concerns about the impact on students and families of changing school calendars. And second, there were a number of families and a number of participants, not only in the information session, but also in the thought exchange that said, well, if this has to happen, could Pleasant Grove perhaps be year-round? And maybe that would allow for some stability of calendar continuity for our families and create a better K-8 calendar alignment for that large group of students that would be going into Pleasant Grove and also at Alston Ridge Middle for middle school. So a few of the Q&As that we did as a result of all that feedback, again, we fully understand that there is a much stronger preference to just not be reassigned at all, and we get that and we understand that. And if wherever possible, we're trying to limit the impacts of assignment. In fact, we heard similar comments earlier in our engagement processes in the spring and throughout the summer, and even last year when we were doing last year's assignment plan, that really stability means more than just the ability to have a transfer and stay at your school, that for a lot of families, that stability means please try not to reassign us if you don't have to. We hear that, and that is absolutely our goal. And we're faced with some very challenging circumstances where we have capped schools and crowded schools, and we have growth coming in areas where the schools are already capped and crowded, which are specific examples here for Alston Ridge and Parkside. And we have limited ability to identify new capacity. And so in this particular region, there is an opportunity to have a different assignment area for Pleasant Grove that sort of meets both of these needs. It would relieve the caps and the overcrowding situations at two of our cap schools that have continued growth in their base attendance area that's continuing to come in the next 1 to 2 years and beyond. And it would create some level of proximity. We totally understand that this may not be the closest school to your area, but certainly it is the closest school with available capacity over time. So a couple of the questions that were specific to this area were, why are they being proposed to be reassigned? I think I've explained this already. This is available on our website. It's in the frequently asked questions section. It's also posted with the slide deck from draft 2. In addition, there were some questions about, well, if this does go through, does that mean that some of the students who would remain assigned by base to these schools that have been sent to the overflow school, could they come back? And the short answer is, over time, that's really the goal. At this stage, it might be a little early because, as you'll recall, there are some generous stability rules that are being proposed. So we do need to see the impact of the stability transfers before we can make some final recommendations on bringing overflow students back. But certainly that would be the long-term goal. Now for tonight, what got us to here? To here was these questions that we kept hearing, either through the thought exchange or through the virtual public information sessions about, well, if we're going to go through with this proposal, could Pleasant Grove perhaps become year-round? So that would be one less change for our families. It would be a change in school, but hopefully not a change in calendar. So we shared this information with the board and said that if we were to go through with that, that would allow families that are recommended to be assigned from Alston Ridge and Parkside Elementary that stability of calendar. It would allow for K-8 calendar alignment for a large majority of the families that would be impacted by the current proposal. It does create or allow for a change, changing the calendar for existing Pleasant Grove Elementary students that remain assigned to the school. So those students that are part of the existing base for Pleasant Grove that would remain assigned to Pleasant Grove would experience a calendar change. It does allow for sufficient accommodation of future growth in the area. So if there are some new developments that come along in this base assignment area, it would allow for that growth without much challenge. It does require substantive preparation from school staff, and we have heard in the thought exchange the concerns about staff being able to pivot and build out a year-round calendar so quickly. And so that is something that people need to think about and that we as decision makers need to think about. It does increase the capacity of the school from 616 to 814. And so you can see in the table that's toward the bottom of this slide that would take that original projection of being around 99% crowded to being closer to 75% crowded in that first year of operations, which would allow some space for growth over time. All right, and so that's kind of where we were, and that's what we presented to the board. So some of you have already heard this information or you've already reviewed it on the website. So if you haven't and you'd like to look at those a little bit more slowly, please go to our website, that enrollment proposal site, and you can look at all of the information from the draft 2 presentation, a recording of the presentation, as well as the complete slide deck, and you can kind of go through that at your own pace. As a reminder, if you'd like to post a question today, I do know some people have joined us since the last time I showed this slide. If you'll join this particular thought exchange, because this is a unique individual thought exchange specific to the question about Pleasant Grove becoming year-round, if you will do us a favor and use the hashtag session6, that'll allow our host to identify which comments and thoughts and questions are being posted live in today's session so that we know we want to answer those in just a few moments. If, however, you'd prefer to use the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet, there's some guidance there for you on the bottom of the screen. Again, once you see that your question has been removed, that's your confirmation that our moderators have seen and captured your question or your comment. Since we're all together and we're talking about this Northwestern area, I did want to take a moment and just make sure everyone was aware that we did share an update to the capital improvement plan as it relates to new construction for the Northwestern area in particular. You'll notice that M19 highlighted here with the circle is now projected to open in 2026-27. So when we presented draft 1, all signs were pointing to an opening in 25-26, but between draft 1 and draft 2, we did receive some feedback and information from our facilities design and construction group that, as you'll notice, there's an asterisk due to market volatility, scope changes, design and construction schedules. One of those elements, the school has been projected to be delayed with its opening, so it will not open until 26-27. While it doesn't specifically impact the direct recommendations for the 24-25 enrollment plan, it certainly factors into that larger conversation about K-8 calendar alignment for the region. Just as a reminder, Woods Creek Elementary is the school that's scheduled to open for 24-25. It's located here along the US 1 corridor towards the southwestern corner of the county. And here you now see the updated slide that shows that the blue circles are now the 5 schools that are proposed to open, in 25-26. And then the remaining 3 sites are either 26-27 or beyond in the current capital improvement plan. As a friendly reminder, new construction isn't the only type of capital improvement that we do. So along the same 7-year cycle, you will hear about renovation projects that are happening throughout the district as well, to try to make sure that our existing inventory of schools are able to be maintained at a proper level. Okay, want to talk about stability rules. We're only going to talk about the stability rules specific to Pleasant Grove. There have been a lot of questions about this on the thought exchange. We did notice there might have been some confusing information on our address lookup. We've corrected that. So because the Pleasant Grove recommendations include a significant number of students being proposed to be assigned out of Pleasant Grove, along with a significant number of students being proposed to be assigned into Pleasant Grove, we do have a little bit different type of recommendation for this than a traditional existing school to existing school recommendation. So the set of recommendations you see here for stability transfers, some of you may have heard the term grandfathering. In our district, we use the term stability because it's a more accurate description. We're trying to provide a stable school environment. So if you're proposed to be assigned out of Pleasant Grove or into Pleasant Grove, the current recommendation is that if you have a rising 4th or 5th grade student, so for the 24-25 school year, the students would be going into 4th or 5th grade, they would be eligible to submit a stability transfer and get guaranteed approval to be able to stay at their current school if they'd like without district transportation. And if they have any younger siblings, kindergarten through 3rd grade, that they'd like to join them and stay with them, they would be eligible as well. In addition, those younger students would be eligible to stay at that school through the 5th grade if that's what the family desires, or if at some point in time you want them to go to Pleasant Grove, you could simply put in a back to base request at the appropriate time, and we would help you with that. So what that means is that allows us to manage the large change in the base attendance area for the school and still ensure that there's a sufficient number of students coming to the school for 24-25 to have a proper operations and have enough staff on hand to be able to accommodate all the students. I will say that these are more generous stability rules than we normally offer in this type of situation. Usually it's only the rising 5th grade students, and any younger students would normally only be allowed to stay for the 1 year that the 5th grader is there. So we have, in response to feedback that we heard in the spring and throughout the summer and even through last year's enrollment plan, offered these expanded stability rules to be responsive to that request from families for more stability. Okay. Again, for those of you that may have joined us late, this is the best way to ask your questions. Either use the thought exchange and hashtag session 6 or use the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet. Again, the thought exchange is the official public comment capture tool. And if you'll use that hashtag session 6, that lets us know that you're posting live in today's session and it won't just be a general comment that maybe is being posted elsewhere. Real quick, let's go through the timeline and next steps, and then we'll jump into your questions. So where are we in the timeline? So back in May, we started with an initial discussion where we shared with the board and had a conversation with the board and left that meeting understanding that our goal was to work not only to find an assignment plan for the new Woods Creek Elementary, it was also to try to provide relief to any capped schools that we could, as well as to address some of our overcrowded schools such that they wouldn't need to become capped. If you may not be aware, but capping as an individual family may feel like a good solution because that means your student that's already in the school gets to stay. But as a district, operationally, it's very inefficient and it creates a lot of instability for the families that move in later, as they then have to be assigned to a school that's different from their neighbor. And that also means I have to put 2 buses into that community to inefficiently take the handful of students that are moving in late over to the overflow school while the other group of students is going to the base school. So it does create a lot of operational efficiencies for us as a district, and it's not an ideal plan. If you'll look at our policy, they are defined as temporary membership caps, and so they are intended to be used to bridge the gap while we find longer term solutions. So when we did discuss with the board in May, we were looking to come up with an assignment plan for the new Woods Creek Elementary, address cap schools where possible, deal with overcrowded schools if at all possible, and of course, as you know, it's been in the public eye for quite some time, do what we can to support reductions of pressure on our transportation system. In June, we provided an update on all of the public engagement that we had done throughout the spring, and that's where we shared that there's a desire for stability, there's a desire for communities to stay together, so if there does have to be a reassignment, let's make sure we don't break communities apart. There's desire to have that K-8 calendar continuity wherever possible. So we're thinking about that and feeder pattern alignment. So just lots of interesting pieces of information. You're welcome to view all of this material. It is posted to our website in the Future Schools section. Then on September 19th, we brought forth the first draft. So know that when staff put together the first draft, it was in response not only to the guidance and direction on May 2nd, but also thinking about the feedback that we had received along the way from our community and our families about what they desire. And so while we understand, again, very clearly, being reassigned is no one's first choice. That's not my first choice. It's not your first choice. We understand that. Yet there are some problems that are situated in such a way that reassignment really is the best tool that we have in our toolbox, to address the concern. We hosted a round of engagement sessions, and we've heard very clearly during our second round of public engagement since the release on October 17th, why didn't you make any changes after we gave all that feedback? And it's a very good and genuine and honest question. And the reality is that although we hear again very clearly that being reassigned isn't a preference, there was nothing in the comments or the feedback that allowed us to continue to solve the challenges that were before us in a different way. Recommendations that we received generally encourage us to look at even farther away neighborhoods to solve some of the challenges, or were recommendations that didn't solve the challenges we were looking for. And we can get into that in our Q&A section. On November 8th, the board will hold a public hearing. So if you are interested in attending that, that is the type of hearing where you can sign up and register. I believe they've set it for 2-minute speaking times. They'll have information on how to sign up and speak closer to the date of the hearing. And that'll be for the board. And then on November 21st, staff will present a final draft to the board at their work session with the goal of bringing a final plan for approval on the same night, later that same night. All right, I think we're about there. Is our host ready? Like I said, I wanted to try to get through the information part as fast as possible so that we could get to our questions. So at this time, if you have yet to post a question or a thought, please use our thought exchange or our Q&A feature. Our hosts and moderators have been rapidly trying to capture all of those comments and questions and get them organized so that we can go ahead and answer absolutely as many as possible before our time is up today.
Thank you, Susan. I would like to welcome Mr. Cedric Williams, Area Superintendent, Assistant Superintendent, who has joined the call, so thank you. I know we've reviewed a lot of information tonight, and we want to address as many of your questions as possible. So please take a few moments and post any questions or comments using the special thought exchange or the Q&A feature. As a reminder, questions posted to the Q&A feature may not be included in the final summary, as the thought exchange is our official capture tool for this discussion. As you're posting questions, we will review those that have been submitted during the session and start with those.
Ready when you are, Lewis.
Okay. So first question, Susan, with Briar Creek already being a year-round option in the area, could this school be the option for taking students from Morrisville, which would give more time for the board to see the impact of future growth and the need for additional year-round schools?
So I think if I hear the question correctly, it's instead of taking students that are currently proposed to go from, let's say, Alston Ridge or Parkside to Pleasant Grove, to send them to Briar Creek instead. And if I'm understanding the question correctly, is that how you think it is stated, Lewis?
That's how I see it. Being that that is a year-round school
already,
in the area, could that absorb the growth? Yes.
Sure. What you may not be aware of, and you may want to look back at the first draft, is that in addition to the recommendations for Alston Ridge and Parkside Elementary to come into Pleasant Grove, there's another set of recommendations for portions of Pleasant Grove to be assigned into Briar Creek, Leesville Road Elementary, and York Elementary. So at this time, the current draft already has absorbed the available space at Briar Creek Elementary with that first set of recommendations to relieve the pressure on Pleasant Grove. And the reasoning behind that was twofold. One, to take advantage of some available capacity at the school. And two, as you'll hear me say quite regularly, not necessarily your closest school, but the closest school with available capacity. So sending the students that currently go to Pleasant Grove, that group to Briar Creek, would be a more proximate school for them. And then that would allow the Morrisville families to go to Pleasant Grove, which would be significantly closer to those families' homes than Briar Creek would be. So at this time, I don't know that we would move forward with a recommendation to switch that around, but it is an interesting point, and we'll certainly evaluate that further.
Okay, Susan, is Pleasant Grove big enough to become a year-round calendar school?
Oh, great question. Yes, we did talk with our facilities team and have understood that with its current design, it could absorb a multi-track year-round schedule. And as you saw on the one slide, it would go from something in the 700s to a little bit over 800 total capacity. So it would allow the school to gain, not quite, but close to 200 additional seats. So yes, it is designed in such a way that it can support a multi-track year-round calendar.
Will the Pleasant Grove vote, in other words, for year-round, be part of the package deal with the student enrollment plan, or will that decision be done separately?
Sure. Thank you for that question, because anyone who's been in the district for a number of years probably knows that generally speaking, we don't include calendar conversions with the assignment plan. Usually calendar conversions are part of a different conversation that happens in the January, February timeframe, and then we can use those decisions to help us with assignment recommendations the following fall. So this is a unique situation, and based on the feedback from families and community members as a result of the release of the first draft of the 24-25 plan and lots of conversation around that change in calendar for some families, as well as the K-8 calendar continuity concerns, the board has directed us to look at this as a special information item now to bring forward some final analysis in the final draft. So there is a possibility that we could have a unique situation in which the board is approving both the assignment plan recommendations and a calendar conversion for Pleasant Grove. But again, it's a little too early to say yes or no that that would happen, because we're still collecting all of the feedback. As a reminder, not only do we have today's information session, but that thought exchange that you have access to is open until November 3rd. So, and we have the public hearing on November 8th. So we really want to make sure we allow enough time for families to participate and engage in this conversation before making any final recommendations to the board. But it is a possibility, I guess, is the short answer to that question.
Wouldn't making Pleasant Grove year-round reduce the challenges with Providence Place going to Pleasant Grove? In other words, would making Pleasant Grove year-round, would that provide enough capacity so Providence Place wouldn't have to go to Pleasant Grove?
Oh, so just as a reminder, what this current draft is recommending in terms of having students come from Alston Ridge and Parkside Elementary into Pleasant Grove is to relieve the capped and crowded situations at those two schools. And we've heard a lot of feedback about both of those campuses. I want to be really, really clear that when a school is capped, the total number of students that are being served at that school is well above the designed educational capacity of that campus. And in some cases, significantly above that design capacity. So in the case of our CAP schools, what's happened is we've worked in partnership with our board, our facilities, our long-range planning team to figure out what is the total number of students that this campus can hold so that we can allow as many students as possible to attend their base school before having to send them to an overflow school. Yet, that is not an ideal situation for either of these schools. So even if a school is capped and maybe not fully sending students to overflow schools, they're still operating well above the design capacity for those campuses, which, as you as a parent at one of those schools might already see, it impacts carpool lines, it impacts lunches, it impacts recesses, it impacts how many students are moving through the hallways at any given time during class changes and, moving to specials. It creates challenges for providing accurate, or not accurate, but appropriate academic space for some of our special courses and things like that. So it's just not how the school is designed to be used. So we're working as a staff to get to a point where we can get the numbers of enrollment down at those two campuses in advance of growth that is already coming, that's already under construction, that will be coming into those base areas that's even closer to the school than these sets of neighborhoods. So converting Pleasant Grove to year-round would certainly increase the capacity at that school, but doing that by itself and not moving any students into it wouldn't relieve the crowding and cap concerns at Alston Ridge and Parkside, which is really the main goal of what we're trying to do here.
Okay. While we understand the necessity to balance all four pillars, does this Northwestern draft prioritize operational efficiency over the other three pillars?
Fair question. What I'll say in any assignment plan, if you're being reassigned, it feels like stability doesn't apply to you. However, I would encourage everyone to, if you haven't yet watched the video that explains the pillars or looked at the actual contents of Board Policy 4150 as it relates to the pillars, sometimes there's a misunderstanding in terms of the direction that's been given to staff with those pillars. So for stability, what our stability pillar tells us is that when reassignments happen, we need to allow for some sort of stability transfer, particularly for rising 5th, 8th, 12th grade students to be able to stay at their current school. Anything above and beyond that would be a more generous stability rule than what's guided or given to us in policy. When it comes to proximity, our proximity pillar is not simplistically defined as going to your closest school. It actually says the closest school with available capacity to sustain the enrollment for the area. So we feel that we've done a decent job in balancing all four pillars, yet we do understand that anything that's a change can feel unstable for families. So certainly operational efficiency might have prompted some of the conversation, particularly as I related to capping and crowding, but all four pillars have been evaluated and tried to balance them as best as possible with the recommendations.
Why are traditional schools like Cedar Fork and Green Hope not being considered for a calendar change? Are any other traditional schools being considered for calendar changes?
Extremely fair question. As one of the earlier questions mentioned, hey, are you going to put a calendar conversion in the assignment plan at the same time? They probably have an understanding that's not traditionally how, the order in which we go. So normally when we have conversations about potential calendar conversions, specifically traditional to year round, or even in a case where maybe some, growth has been minimized or new schools have opened, maybe a year-round school needs to become traditional. Those conversations happen separate from the assignment plan. So they'll happen in that January, February, March timeframe. And those conversations are held within the confines of our facilities committee with the board. So if that's a conversation you're interested in monitoring and watching, I'd really encourage you to plug in to the facilities committee meetings and watch those on the YouTube or, however it is that you follow along with those types of meetings. But those conversations are going to be held in the spring. And we do hear very loud and very clear that there is still continued growth and still continued enrollment capping and crowding concerns in this region beyond just these two schools. So yes, there will be continued dialogue and ongoing conversations about when it's appropriate to make a recommendation to convert the calendar of a school. I can't say yes or no that any of those specific schools that were named would be prioritized. However, those conversations do happen, like I said, January, February, March timeframe through our facilities committee. So stay tuned.
If Pleasant Grove is indeed converted to a year-round calendar, is it feasible with the amount of time we have for this to be done?
Excellent question. And that is something that we are continuing to assess. We have had some initial conversations with our area superintendent in the region, with the principal of the school. We've certainly talked with our HR department and our curriculum department, and it is doable. However, it would require a lot of support and be very intentional with that. So we do want to make sure we're checking on all of those factors, because it's a very good question to ask, is how quickly can you convert that type of campus and how quickly can you get prepared to switch that type of calendar? And so we are very aware of the tight timeline here. And we would, if the board asks us to move forward with this, we would certainly make sure as a staff that we're providing all of those supports to the school and to the staff.
Knowing that stability and continuity are very important, why are we considering changing the calendar and moving many students into this new school?
I think it's a similar question, maybe, but just asked in a little bit different way. As I mentioned in the outset, if you were able to join us for the beginning, back in May, we had an initial conversation with our board about, what are the goals for this year's enrollment plan? And certainly with a new school opening, we needed to come up with a plan to fill that new Woods Creek Elementary in the southwestern portion of the county. In addition, we are continuously faced with capped and overcrowded schools. And so the board did ask us to look to see where we could relieve some pressure on those campuses that don't have new schools on the horizon. And so in this area, there are no new elementary schools coming anytime soon. As I showed you with the graphic for the capital improvement plan, there's no new elementary capacity coming to this region over the next 7 years. And the crowding and the capping situation is at a point where the continued development and growth in the region is going to continue to put pressure on these schools. And so we were looking to find a long-term solution for these campuses in light of the fact that no new schools will be opening in the region over the next 7 years. So while we hear the stability and continuity of education piece, we're trying to find the balance between that so that families won't have to be capped out of their base school, and that we can have sufficient capacity at the newly assigned school to be able to maintain those populations for the foreseeable future and provide that continuity on the back end. Again, we get changing schools is not what's preferred. Hear that very clearly. And if we could avoid it, we would.
Have we considered Pleasant Grove families that want to maintain the traditional calendar?
Absolutely. And that's part of why we are having this conversation and just not making a quick decision. And so we are evaluating the thought exchange. I've seen comments on both sides. I've seen comments saying, well, if we're going to be reassigned, we really like the year-round calendar because we've come accustomed to it. We have a middle schooler who's also going to be on year-round. We can see the benefits of it. We see comments that say, hey, I'm already at Pleasant Grove and I'm on the traditional calendar. We're not proposed to be changed. I don't want to change the calendar. And so we're continuing to evaluate all of the feedback that we're receiving so that we can give the board as comprehensive a view of the perspective of the families that would be directly impacted by this change, in addition to staff. I'm very thankful. I've noticed that several staff members have been participating in the thought exchange and in these information sessions, and their feedback will be critical in this decision as well.
According to our 26-27 projections, there's a drop in enrollment. And due to this reassignment, have we taken into consideration that this drop in enrollment may be due to the reassignment of schools?
Oh, excellent question. So the projections that we use are not based on choices that are being made today. They're based on a long-range projection that is partnered with our long-range planning department and some external demographers. We do an annual update to it. It's a 10-year forecast that gives us an outlook for growth throughout the district and by region. And so one thing that we're keenly aware of is the town of Morrisville in particular has been updating their zoning plans and their development plans. And so our long-range planning department has been working to get all of that information from them to determine how we can update. So the dip that you saw in the projection was really, it's marginal. I think it was a 1, maybe a 2% dip. That's very standard for an area that might be somewhat stable, that it would fluctuate and ebb and flow and go from 99% to 97% and back and forth or something along those lines. However, we're also aware there is a potential for some new growth in this area, which could give us some growth in those out years that you don't see in those first 3 years. And so that's just something we have to constantly balance back and forth, is what we know about growth that's coming in the future, in addition to the growth that, or the stable population that we're seeing today.
Another projection question, Susan.
Sure.
With the projected growth numbers at Pleasant Grove Elementary, is there a plan for mobile classrooms to be installed on school property?
At this time, there's nothing in the current plans that I'm aware of. That would be a question for our facilities committee again as well. They're monitoring that consistently, but as of right now, this would not necessitate the addition of trailers. We feel confident that we can sustain growth for a reasonable amount of time without that. I will kind of take a moment and do a little public service announcement about trailers. Just as a reminder, trailers are a very, very small component of our capital improvement budgets. And so we don't have as much flexibility as people think we may have in terms of financially, and as also in reference to the availability of trailers just in the market space itself, and vendors that are able to help us move trailers around and install trailers or remove trailers. So, well, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, it was relatively easy to get trailers added to campuses or even removed from campuses. That has become increasingly harder for us over the last several years. The market's just not supporting that, and the cost of it is just, it's not what it once was. So just a side note. But again, if you're interested in specific information about trailers, I would encourage you to plug into our facilities committee, because they do have conversations about that regularly.
If Pleasant Grove were to change to a year-round calendar, what would be the traditional option for students in the Northwest region?
Excellent question. And this is where we're faced. I'm going to kind of reiterate the transportation challenges that we have. One thing you may not have noticed that's included in draft 1, and again in draft 2 is continuing forward, is there are a handful of recommendations to slowly work to remove the transportation that's provided with calendar application options. So as a district, what that means is that we are slowly trying to work away from designating both a base and an alternate calendar that both come with district transportation. So instead, what you'll see is that you'll have your base assigned school that has the guaranteed district transportation, unless of course you're so close to the school that you're in the no transport zone. But you'll have district transportation to your base assigned school. And then from there, if you want a different calendar from your base, let's say it's traditional in this case, you would exercise the other ways for asking for any type of school change. So you could either use the magnet request period, which is actually open now. Most of our magnet schools do operate on a traditional calendar, and several of them do have district provided transportation from this region. So that might be one method of not only getting excellent, amazing magnet programming, but also getting that traditional calendar. The other option would be to use the traditional request for trans period request for transfer period, excuse me. Sometimes we call it the official request for transfer period. Some people might hear it referred to as the hardship transfer. They're all the same thing. It's where you want to put in your individual reasons. It's an online form. You want to put in your individual reasons for why I personally would like a change in school for my student. There's lots of boxes you can check, but there's also a dialogue space where you can say, due to this calendar situation with my family or my daycare needs or whatever it is that's specific to your family as to why you need that other school choice. The good news about the request for transfer period is that you can list up to 3 different school choices. So you can really look and see if there's multiple schools that might meet your family's needs. The downside is you need to be looking at schools that you could provide your own transportation to. So the district, we are working to help you find those alternative options as they can work for you, but we just have to be careful that we can't offer district transportation to all those choices anymore. So it's just, we're reducing the total amount of transportation that's available. So that's a very, very long answer. The question was specifically, would a calendar application option be designated? So the short answer is not specifically. Instead, we would let families look around their area, use the various tools that we have online to see where schools are located and what calendars they're operating on, and determine if they could provide district transportation to that choice. Then they could certainly put in that request and we'd see what we could do within policy to be able to approve those.
Will efforts be made to keep kids on the same track if they apply for a stability transfer or are accepted back to a school, for, let's say, Parkside?
Oh, okay, great. So if you are a student who's projected to be reassigned and you're eligible for stability rules and you're putting in your stability transfer, the good news is those transfers would be submitted and approved in that November to December timeframe. So we haven't talked about this. Once the board approves the plan on November 21st, and we know what the final set of assignment changes are, staff will work as quickly as we can. Please note that that's the Tuesday before the Thanksgiving holiday. So we probably won't get messaging out that Wednesday, but we'll work really hard to get messaging out by the Monday after at the very, very latest. But we'll get messaging out to families with instructions that say, okay, the board has officially approved the plan. Here's some information for you on how to put in your stability transfer. That stability transfer window will open up on designated date. When you put in that transfer, then we'll approve it right then and there, and you'll have your final answer before we leave for the winter holidays. So that means you won't have ever left the school, so you'll still be maintaining the same track that you're already on. So I'm fairly confident that your principals at your existing schools would work to keep you on your same track. For those families that go to the new school, let's say Pleasant Grove gets converted to multi-track year-round and you get assigned to Pleasant Grove, I know the staff would work as hard as they could to maintain tracks for you. There might be some adjustments here and there, but staff would work diligently with families to help them with their track assignments. I kind of answered both sides of that question.
Thank you, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
If there is a calendar shift for Pleasant Grove Elementary School, would that shift happen for the 24-25 school year?
I would think yes, that it would go in part if the change in calendar for Pleasant Grove is going to be specifically in line with this change in assignment for a large group of families that are coming out of a year-round school. The goal would be to create calendar continuity for these families. So it would be my understanding that if the board were to approve this, it would start in the 24-25 school year. Yes.
And
if, capital if.
Well, part B in a follow-up, if yes, when would we be notified so that we can have the least amount of impact for families that have calendars, trips, and vacations planned? When will we be notified so we can make those?
Okay, right. So I think this is part and parcel to the longer question that everyone's asking is like, when will we know for sure? So what we're trying to do is evaluate all of the feedback that's coming through so that by the time we come to the board on the 21st, we as staff can give them a full assessment and a full accounting of all of the feedback we've received so that we can make an informed decision at the table then. So on November 21st, I would think, and I don't want to speak out of turn, that the board would be prepared to make a decision either way. There is always a possibility that they could ask us to extend the conversation a little bit longer. I don't see that in the timeline that they've given us, but in all likelihood, if the recommendation to change calendar goes through, it's more than likely it would happen on November 21st. The families would know at that point in time. Again, I got to put stars and asterisks on that one because that's all contingent on if the board feels comfortable making the decision at that time.
So where is the majority of proposed growth coming from your estimation for Pleasant Grove Elementary School?
Oh, so for Pleasant Grove Elementary School, right now, the assignment areas that are being recommended to go in are relatively stable areas, but we have heard and learned from the town of Morrisville, there are some areas in the existing portion of the Pleasant Grove base that might grow over the next 7 to 10 years. So we're monitoring that. The growth that we're concerned about in the Alston Ridge and Parkside elementary bases are physically closer to those campuses, some of which has already begun. Some of you might already see the construction underway. Others have already been approved and the zoning has been approved. And so we know that those developments are coming online as well. And so they're projected to come online over the next couple of years. So really soon, not in the out years, but in the coming soon years, in the next 2 to 3 years.
I'm not familiar with the year-round track system. So if Pleasant Grove goes to a year-round calendar, would siblings in different grades be prioritized to be placed on the same track?
Oh, absolutely. Our school staff across the board works diligently to make sure that families are on the same track. And just as a quick reminder of how the year-round track system works, I know some people hear the word year-round and think their students are in school for 12 months. They're not. It's really the core premise is 9 weeks on, 3 weeks off. That way, we can create an alternation of students so that at any given point in time, 3 tracks worth of students are in the building at the same time, and at any given time, 1 track worth of students is out of the building. There are a handful of occasions when all 4 tracks are out around the winter holidays, and a lovely week in the middle of the summer we like to call clopening, when 1 school year closes and 1 school year opens. But for the most part, 3 tracks worth of students will be in the building at one point in time, and then 1 track would be out on that alternating sort of relative concept of 9 weeks in, 3 weeks out. But absolutely, our staff work really, really diligently to make sure that any siblings would all be on the same track.
Before we made these decisions or presented this proposal, have we looked at how many times certain neighborhoods have been reassigned? For example, Providence Place and Kitts Creek?
Absolutely, we do. And while we understand that in some of the high growth areas of our district, some communities have been moved as frequently as every 3 years, which is not our preference by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes with the nature of high growth and new school builds, it can happen. We did make sure the standard rule for us is to make sure we're not assigning an area more frequently than every 3 years. That again is not our preference. So in this area, while there may have been a number of reassignments over the last 10 or 20 years, the most recent reassignments are outside that 3-year window. And so we did make sure we assessed that before making any recommendations. Again, this is if you have a question or a comment, let me go back and show everybody. If you have a question or a comment for the session, because I kind of saw a hand go up, if you can please post those to either the Q&A section or to our thought exchange, and then we'll capture that and we'll make sure we answer it.
So Susan, the vast majority of the comments that we've seen on the thought exchange revolve around the instability this may create in the region. Can you speak to that and the proposed instability that all of this movement will have in this region?
Sure. I think I've addressed this a couple of times in the sense that we understand that any change in assignment is just not preferred for families because there is that potential that your student would have to change schools, particularly if they're not eligible under the stability rules. And so we work really, really hard to create the smallest, most minimal impact that we can and yet accomplish the goals of the district in terms of someone asked earlier, we have to be honest, we have to look at operational efficiency. We're stewards of taxpayer resources. We've got to make sure that we're utilizing our facilities, but more importantly, we have to make sure that we're providing the best educational environment for our students, and severely overcrowded schools just does not meet that standard. So we do have to take that into consideration. Yet school reassignment does happen. It's part of being a high growth area. It's part of having a situation where, although our community partners, our towns and our municipalities are really great about sharing information with us about what's going on with their residential development plans, they don't need our approval to move forward with them, and they are not specifically responsible for giving us any land or resources to build schools to support that residential development. The county commissioners and the county government are the group that's responsible for providing that funding. And then, of course, our Board of Education is responsible for then using that funding to build the schools, so that there's a partnership at the county level to get the funding and the facilities constructed, And then there's the municipalities that are working on their own long-range plans and their own municipal plans. And so we do have good partners in that they share with us as much data as they possibly can, again, particularly through that long-range planning and forecasting process. Yet the responsibility falls on us to play catch up quite a bit. So it just creates an interesting situation for us where we have a high growth area. We do see more reassignments than we would prefer. But yes, we do certainly look at the stability in the area. I think there's also concerns. I'm going to expand this one just a little bit. I think this might also be getting at the fact that in this particular region in the Northwest, there's also a new middle school coming online in a couple of years, Parkside Middle, which again has been pushed to 26, 27. And then Morrisville High School is proposed or projected to open in 27, 28. So we do know that this region will most likely be impacted in some way as those schools come online. And we'll be mindful of those changes at that time as those assignment plans need to be created.
Have we considered assigning the new construction happening around Alston Ridge Elementary? Have we considered assigning them to Pleasant Grove?
Sure. And we've had similar questions to this, not only through draft 1 and draft 2, but I think we might have had one a little bit earlier tonight. The concern for us there is that while proximity isn't the most important factor, and certainly we know we're not always sending students to the closest school, sending a area that's even further away from Pleasant Grove to Pleasant Grove instead of a school or a community that's more proximate to Pleasant Grove, it just doesn't align with the way that the pillars are set up. And so we would not intentionally, I think some maybe have used the term hopscotch, we wouldn't intentionally create a situation like that if we can avoid it. So again, we're trying to find the most proximate school with available seats for a sustainable time period.
Are we aware of all the new developments being built around Pleasant Grove? Have we considered waiting to see or waiting to have that new construction finished and then considering the fact that they could be considered, they can be assigned to Pleasant Grove, excuse me?
So I think this parent might be referring more to development that's in the Morrisville area. And I think I touched on that earlier. We do work with our municipal partners to get updates from them as regularly as we can. Officially, we get complete updates once a year, but most of our partners are really good in letting us know if there's a interim update that happens between those 1 year capture times. So we are aware that there is some growth that's coming in the Morrisville area, and that's not coming online, let's say in the next year or two. It's going to take a little while for that to build out. And so we are confident that the Pleasant Grove can sustain this over time. In addition, why not wait? We get this question in a couple of different ways. You know, why not wait till Parkside Middle opens, or why not wait until we see what this new residential plan is going to do? Is that, again, as a reminder, the concern is about relieving the crowding at Alston Ridge and Parkside, and we know that growth is coming. We can visually see that growth coming right now because there are approved residential developments that are ongoing under construction today that are already approved and continuing to move forward. So we know that pressure is coming. And so in order to get ahead of that and try to work to relieve the capped and crowding situations at both of those schools, this really is the best path forward that staff can recommend. So waiting would only make those situations worse over the next 2 years and create even more instability for families in that region.
Susan, this is another track assignment question, but almost in the reverse direction, where they're asking students coming from Parkside with a particular track already assigned to them, would they have priority to remain on the same track if Pleasant Grove were to be converted to year-round?
I have to be careful here because it's a little outside of what our office does. All of our track assignments are managed at the staff or school level, but I do know that our principal would be very keenly aware of the change that's happening for these families and would work as hard as possible to honor family requests. So that would be a conversation with the school principal if when I should say, this goes forward. But yes, I know that the principal in that situation would be keenly aware of what's going on with families and would do everything they could to try to help keep families on their same track if at all possible. But more importantly, certainly keep families on the same track.
Susan, Wake County is known to think outside the box. And can there be an effort put in place or devise different strategies that would help us move away from reassigning neighborhoods, schools, and students every few years?
That'd be great. And we do. I think what you're seeing here with this particular recommendation is an acknowledgement that the growth in the area and that the capping strategies are not sustainable long term. And so this recommendation is an example of an out of the box thinking to try to provide a much more sustainable assignment for students in this area over time so that ideally they can remain assigned to the school for a significant number of years and avoid what feels like a constant reassignment. Yet, as I mentioned earlier, because our municipal planners aren't necessarily responsible for providing land or even supporting the school construction effort, there's a healthy tension, but there's a little bit of a tension between those two efforts. So we're literally constantly playing catch up in our high growth areas and doing everything we can to try to match that growth that's coming. And so when the schools get so full that the students can't fit, one of the levers we have is to reassign students to the next closest school that has available capacity.
And Susan, we have a lot of staff with us tonight,
Yes.
and some of their questions revolve around.
Again, thank you for being here.
Yes, this is. And does district staff and the board, do we garner feedback from staff at the schools where reassignments are proposed to take place?
Certainly, we highly encourage our staff to constantly participate in the thought exchanges and to participate in the virtual public information sessions. I wish they participated as a higher rate as they have tonight and at other sessions, but they're always welcome to participate. If you'll notice on all of our thought exchanges, we have the ability for someone to identify as a staff member. So we collect your feedback in addition to the feedback that we receive from the community, and we're able to share that with the board. When it comes to calendar conversions, obviously it's a very different conversation. And so we do want to navigate that a little bit differently, which is why we wanted to be very intentional about making sure that our staff was invited to this conversation. And if you don't have the link to the thought exchange, we'll make sure that your principal has it and can give it to you. But I did see quite a few staff members participating already, so I think the link has been shared. But we'll make sure for sure it's shared just in case. But yes, we do want your feedback.
So this parent states, I have a son in traditional calendar middle school. A different calendar for my daughter would not work for us and put us in a bind. So my specific question is the calendar change, is this a done deal, or will you really look at our data and our feedback to make an informed decision?
Yeah. This is not a done deal. Thank you for asking that question. Based on the feedback that was received after the first draft was released from the families specifically that were impacted by the potential for a calendar change as well as a calendar misalignment K-8, there were a lot of families that participated with those two very specific concerns. And it is a large portion of students that would ultimately be assigned to Pleasant Grove. They do represent a significant portion of the future student body of the school. So in response, the board did direct us, let's explore this conversation a little bit further. Please collect some feedback for us so we can get a full accounting of the sentiment and the ideas here. Would this help to offset the change? So this is not a done deal right now. We are still early in the stages of collecting feedback. As I said, this is our information session. So tonight's my first chance to really get these types of live questions. I have been monitoring the thought exchange, but it's going to stay open through the 3rd. And I don't want to make, any analysis until all of the thoughts are included. And of course, there's always the public hearing on the 8th that might provide some additional context for the board. So no, this is not a done deal. We are evaluating all of the feedback in its entirety. And we'll work with the board collaboratively to determine what the next step is when we meet with them on the 21st.
Will students from Parkside Elementary eventually get assigned to the up-and-coming Parkside Middle? Or are we considering moving students from Parkside Elementary further away to, say, East or West Cary, or other schools that have more capacity?
Thank you for that question. You are correct. Parkside Middle School is coming on the horizon. We thought it was going to be 25, 26, but again, it's been pushed to 26, 27. We will be coming out into the community again to have some in-person conversations, much like we did in the spring, to get an idea of the sentiments of the community. But at this time, it's a little too early to say what the recommended base assignment area will be for Parkside Middle. Certainly, proximity will be a factor. The school is located on the same campus as Parkside Elementary. So if it's reasonable and appropriate and can be accommodated, we certainly would look to try to keep as many students that are already on that same campus at that same school. But I want to stop short of making a particular promise because, as we know, things can change very quickly with residential development, and we just need to be mindful. But yes, we'll be coming out to the area to have those conversations, but it's a little too early to say specifically which areas would be assigned to Parkside Middle, but certainly that area will be impacted when the school opens.
And Susan, I want to include another question from our staff.
Sure.
Staff is asking, is anyone planning or have we scheduled any time to come and talk to the staff directly? Staff would like more, just more time to give feedback.
Thank you for that recommendation. It's certainly something that we've considered in the background, and that type of information really helps us plan our next steps. So that's a very helpful suggestion. Thank you.
Susan, why can't Wake County schools focus on building elementary schools in growing areas with greater capacity?
Oh, so it's, greater capacity. So that's a lot in that question. And they probably didn't even realize it. So a couple of things that happen for us as a district. One is we try to open schools where we have available capacity. So I'm showing this map just to remind everybody of where we are opening some new elementary schools. Most of the blue circles are actually elementary schools. Only one of those is a high school. And of course, the reddish or orangish colored circle, I'm not sure if you all can see my mouse. I don't think you can. But the sort of southwestern edge, a large number of those are elementary schools. When we design and build elementary schools, several things get taken into consideration. And I need to be careful here because it's a little outside my scope of responsibility. Our facilities design and construction team does an excellent job of doing research and reviewing the current research on optimal sizes for schools. And then the board adopts sort of standard, I don't want to say footprints because that's probably the wrong term, but a standard model or design in terms of as a district, how many students are we comfortable putting on an individual campus? And so we design the buildings according to that sort of max standard. Also, please keep in mind that just about 9-10 years ago, it might be just a little bit longer, the state legislature changed the class size ratios on us in terms of the max class size that a student can have for kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. And that almost immediately reduced our capacity because we historically were having between 20 and 24 students in those types of classes. And now we're restricted to not having more than 18 kindergarten, 17 second and third, and then 16 for first. So there's just some challenges there. But our capacity models for these are, and again, I'm speaking a little bit out of turn. If you're really interested, probably go to our facilities design and construction page. And again, maybe listen in on the facilities committee meetings because they do address all of the research and all of the data that's taken into consideration when designing a building. And then once that design is in place, then that determines how many students we can fit on that particular campus. Separately, those of you that have ever done any type of construction projects might be aware that just because that's the design we want, the land that we purchased might not be suitable for that size of a campus. So that can also sometimes be a restricting factor. And if you've driven around, it looks like there's lots of available land, but not all of it is suitable for something the size of or with the infrastructure to support a school. And so that's another concern as well. So it's just a lot of things that need to go into that decision. But yes, I think our district is doing a good job of trying to build schools as big as they can while meeting those educational standards, yet the growth is still outpacing those construction projects.
If we have a multi-year plan in place, why aren't we able to let staff and the public know when exactly Parkside Middle will be open?
Okay, so Parkside Middle currently is projected to open for the 2026-2027 school year. As far as the specific calendar that it'll operate on, that will be decided when the enrollment plan for that comes out, and that would be most likely in the fall of 25. So we do know that. We did project originally that it was going to be open in 25, 26, but some construction delays and things like that have happened to delay that, so it won't be open to students until 26, 27. So we do know that as of now.
Okay, I just want to take the opportunity to once again thank everyone for coming tonight. We reviewed all the questions and we've done our best to try to answer them all to the best of our ability. We thank you and we hope this session has been informative and we hope you better understand the potential impact of converting Pleasant Grove Elementary from a traditional calendar to a multi-track year-round calendar school. Separately, we appreciate your open and honest participation. Your input and feedback is vital to the refinement of our enrollment plan. Please remember the final draft will be presented to the Board of Education on November 21st for review and approval. This special thought exchange will remain open through November 3rd, and we encourage you, please, and you can see it on your screen right now, we encourage you to please continue to post your comments, rate your comments, and explore the exchange. We do take this valuable information into account. Again, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the remainder of your evening. Thank you again.
Yes. And before we go, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our wonderful host, Lewis, and our staff moderators. I am seeing a handful of questions. Do we have new questions coming in? Because we are technically going till 7:30, but it looks like maybe one or two potentially new questions came in. But while we do that, again, just thank you so much. Again, is to just echo Lewis's sentiments for your honest feedback. Thank you for some of the suggestions you brought forward and some of the challenging questions. Some of them are just really highlight the nature of the complexity of assignment in our district. We're going to work to take some of the questions that you've posed tonight and that we've answered tonight that may not already be captured on our website with the frequently asked questions and get those updated for you. So please, I encourage you to visit probably on Monday, as I mentioned. Just give us a couple of days to really get those pulled together, really recapture the questions that have been asked and get those answers posted to the website. Specific to some of the recommendations about staff, I'll be referring to some of our internal team to figure out if we can take them up on that offer. And then parents, just again, thank you so much for your willingness to be honest with us and to ask us these questions. And then Lewis, I'll just ask for any of the questions are any new questions being posted or
Not that I checked, Susan, no. So I encourage you
I'm probably
again,
just seeing a lag. I probably have a time lag on mine where I'm seeing old questions that were posted previously. So again, thank you.
Thank you all, and you have a good evening, and thank you again for joining us.
And again, the recording will be posted to the website in a couple of days. So thank you so much if you want to have any friends or family watch this, or if you want to encourage them to join the thought exchange. Again, much appreciated and have a wonderful evening.